So thank you everyone for coming. Good morning to you. This is the fourth of our webinar series about ecological, make Earth green again. So the previous three webinars, the recordings are on the website, climatehealers.org/webinar. So please feel free to share that page with people so that they can see what's going on. Today is the fourth one, and then we have two more coming up, one in June 6th, June 8th, and final one will be on the 13th of July. Now, there are a couple of really huge news that came out recently. The melting of the ice in the Arctic is almost a foregone conclusion now. It's going to happen by 2022. And Professor James Anderson was the professor who worked on the ozone hole. So he is basically saying that there is zero chance that there will be any ice left beyond 2022. And this is why nations of the world are now discussing who gets the right to drill in the Arctic. It's the US and Russia and China are arguing about this, and Canada. Unfortunately, when the ice is gone, it's going to create a positive feedback loop, which is going to heat up the Arctic even faster. There will be methane rise from the Arctic as well, most likely from the undersea methane, will be the first to come out. And so we are on track to trigger these positive feedback loops that we really don't want to do. And just a few days ago, there was a report from the UN Biodiversity Council, basically showing the dire state of biodiversity at the moment. And so Robert Watson, who's the head of this Biodiversity Council, said that the future of humanity depends on action now. If we do not act, our children and all future generations will never forgive us. And he's right, you know. And if you look at what we have been proposing to do on climate change and on the environment, so here are the IPCC greenhouse gas concentration pathways. So these are the pathways that they analyzed, which shows RCP 8.5 is a radiation forcing of 8.5 watts per square meter in 2100, which is essentially a do nothing, which is business as usual. The second is an RCP 6.0, which is, I'm using like a healthcare analogy here. It's like a bypass surgery for the planet. And that's going to cost $100 trillion to do this bypass surgery. And this is really what Extinction Rebellion is calling for. And RCP 4.5 is 4.5 watts per square meter by 2100. And that's, to me, is the equivalent of bypass surgery plus chemotherapy for the Earth. And the last one they considered was RCP 2.5, which is 2.5 watts per square meter in 2100. And that's the equivalent of bypass surgery plus chemotherapy plus kidney transplant for the patient. What they did not consider is an RCP where it goes below where we are today, which is what I call RCP 1.0. This is something I added because this is not there in the IPCC. So imagine an RCP 1.0, which is basically going down to about 1 watts per square meter by 2100. And that is the equivalent of a whole food plant-based lifestyle change from a healthcare perspective for the planet. And what we are hearing from scientists is that there is a line that we cannot cross. So all of these curves that the IPCC put out assumes that nature does not take over, that we have complete control over the greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere. But if the Arctic ice melts and Arctic methane starts bubbling up, then nature starts having her own role in increasing the greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere. So what we heard from the IPCC just a couple of months ago was that there is a line here. The line is close to 450 parts per million of CO2 equivalent. And if you cross that, then nature takes over. So this is a line, it's a red line for us saying do not cross. And none of the IPCC's RCPs actually follow this. So meaning they all violate this line. And if we violate the line, all bets are off. Okay? So this is why the only choice we really have is this, the blue line, which is to start bringing it down as quickly as possible. So in terms of what we have to do on the planet, this is business as usual, 8.5. This is clean energy transition. The second one, RCP 6.0. This would be clean energy plus geoshading. And this is clean energy geoshading plus BECCS. BECCS is bioenergy and carbon sequestration, which is basically growing a whole bunch of trees and cutting them down and burning them for energy, and then capturing the carbon as you burn the trees and sequestering it, which is, it's the technology that's not yet available like that. So the only choice we really have is going to a lifestyle change plus clean energy and possibly some geoshading to overcome what we have already done in the Arctic, and a rapid ecosystems restoration that can sequester the carbon as quickly as possible, so that you use nature to help us draw down the carbon from the atmosphere rather than trying to do it ourselves. So it is by going for a lifestyle change that we can open up these RCP possibilities. Without a lifestyle change, which is what the IPCC had been considering so far, we are stuck with having to kill ourselves. And the obvious lifestyle change that I've been talking about is eliminating this block. This entire block animal production system, it's using up a lot of resources, a lot of food input, and it's using up a lot of land, which can be better spent on regeneration. So we are currently extracting over 10 gigatons of food from nature, which is 6.36 plus 3.87. And we're only eating 1.54 gigatons of food. So rather than extracting 6 times as much food from nature and then throwing away so much of it to the animals, giving it to the animals, if we eat it directly, then we can completely eliminate this block and free up the land for regenerating forests. So that's the basic goal. A complete lifestyle change without using animals at all. And we know that if we just bring back the original forests that were there on this land, on just the grazing land that we are currently using to feed animals, just by bringing back the original forests that were there, you can sequester 265 gigatons of carbon on just 41% of this land area. Now this number was obtained by just taking out grasslands and replacing them with the original forests that were there, and then calculating how much extra carbon got sequestered by doing that. Now we have a new project going on in the University of Illinois, where we are not only replacing these with the original forest, but we're also saying, okay, if there was a prairie there, let's replace it with the prairie. So rewilding this entire land, and then looking at the transient response of the system. So how fast will the carbon get sequestered, so that we know what can be achieved in the next 10 years, in the next 20 years, in the next 5 years. So we have a better idea of what this lifestyle change would really do. Now, so far, we hadn't even looked at what we can do with this, because there are a whole bunch of forest inputs that we are taking from this managed forestry. And managed forestry is really not forest, it's really monocultures. So there are not many animals who live in this so-called forest, because animals do not like monocultures. And they have to put up with clear cutting in the monocultures, because these forests are managed by timber industries and people like that. So most wild animals are in the unused forest section, which is just 11 million square kilometers. And even that has been shrinking recently, which is why the Biodiversity Commission asked us to change our ways very quickly. So this is a broad outline of the solution we're looking for, and analyzing what this would do for the carbon drawdown on the planet. Now, the soil has been degraded almost everywhere. You can see the soil degradation. Now, the good news of this is that when we bring back the soil, it will sequester a lot of carbon. So the estimate is that 110 gigatons of carbon was lost through degradation in the last 200 years. So the forests also have been degraded. You can see the area of forests has been declining, and it's down here. And even this, we know that 2/3 of it, sorry. Even the forests here, we know that 2/3 of this is managed forest, and it's only about 1/3 which is unmanaged. The agricultural land, this, and then there's the degraded land here. So this has been increasing, so because we've been taking it from forests. And if you look at the trend that the UN has been projecting, it's basically going down, right? So 2040, 2050, they want to go down. Instead, what Unifying Fields has been analyzing is what would happen if we change our lifestyle and reverse this, so that there is more forests being created every year. And maybe the forests could be food forests. So take the degraded land and start converting it into food forests, and then bring back the original forests that were there. The idea behind food forests is to eventually replace agriculture completely. Because food forests are forests that are intentionally created with every plant in there being edible. So you'll have large fruit trees and nut trees, and then low trees or dwarf fruit trees. And then you have climbers, which are basically vines around the trees. Shrubs would be currants and berries. Then you have soil surface, so basically strawberries and things like that, and herbs, and then root vegetables. So create an entire ecosystem of these, and so that they replicate and regenerate automatically. So that increasingly agriculture becomes unnecessary for human beings. Forests also have a very important function at modulating the water cycle of the planet, because forests create cloud covers. So the cloud cover on top of the forest is condensation from the transpiration of water through the forest, through the leaves of the trees. And as the condensation happens, it creates a low pressure zone, and which allows moisture from over the ocean to be sucked in over the forest. So it creates a cycle in which moisture from the ocean is brought back onto land and eventually falls on land. So this is called a biotic pump. And the pump happens because of the biota in the forest, microorganisms that transpire with the water that become nucleus for raindrop formation. And the good news with that is as we increase the forest cover in a given area, it creates more rain on land as opposed to rain in the ocean. And, and then the forest retains that water and keeps it underground and transpires it through the roots. So it creates this water cycle in which the salt water in the ocean gets converted to fresh water. It's important to do the biotic pump reactivation around the coast because coastal forests have access to the moisture over the ocean. And so it allows this recirculation to happen. So if you regenerate forests around the coast, along the coast, you create the biotic pump effect. And then as the forests grow inland, the biotic pump then spreads inland as well. So this is an example of the kinds of forests that we can create now for the biotic pump reactivation. And this again is the work from Unifying Fields. I had sent their report out earlier. I think everyone should have it. And in most cases, regenerating original forest does not require much work. It requires us to remove invasive species that were there and possibly plant some species that had been taken out. And otherwise, just let nature be. So this is the example that I've shown before, which is in 4 years, it goes from this to this. And you can clearly see that the soil is already being regenerated and the forest is just flourishing. So this is the greatest transformation in human history. And we are going to be part of this. And there is no choice for us but to make this transformation happen. And I wanted to show this again because I decided to change the name from Homo sapiens. I was calling it Holo sapiens before, but I decided to go with Judy Carmen's nomenclature, Homo ahimsa, because Homo ahimsa is it combines a Greek word with a Sanskrit word. So it indicates a blend of East and West. And it talks about our nonviolent nature. Whereas here, sapiens means wise. And especially our current genus is supposed to be Homo sapiens sapiens, which is wise twice. And I realized that no wise person will ever call themselves wise. So it's a complete misnomer to call ourselves wise, because wisdom comes with humility. So I think this is a better name, and I decided to go with this. So the main transformation is from carnism, speciesism to veganism, and from death and cruelty to animals to love and kindness for animals, from disease and division among human beings to health and unity for humanity, from destruction of the planet to regeneration of the planet, from a culture of consumption to a culture of compassion, from a scarcity mindset to an abundance mindset, and from a money-driven economy to a service-driven economy. And in the current system, it's the architecture of money that forces us to do all of these on the left-hand side. So the way money is created automatically creates a system in which we are stuck doing these things. So we have to create a new currency that implements these. So a culture of compassion, and automatically creates an abundance mindset and promotes service. And apparently there is a currency that, I was describing Ahimsa coin to Keys, and he told me that there is already a currency in Germany called Gradido that does exactly what we are talking about. So I'm looking into that to see if we can just borrow it from them and use it. So, and we are working on a new app that would automate what we have been doing so far and help people participate from around the world without having to wait for a conference. And this transformation is already happening. It's driven by women, because more than 3/4 of the vegan population is currently female, and less than 1/4 is male, and is driven by young people. So less than 30 years is almost half of all vegans. And 30 to 45 is this blue, and then yellow. It's 45 to 60. And I happen to be on the border here. Unfortunately, next year I'm going to fall into this category. So, and they are the slowest to come along. But because it's driven by youth, it's inevitable that this is going to happen. This is how major transformations occur. And then the youth are going to look back at us and say, how could you have done this? So detailed ecological shifts going from monocultures to biodiversity, from climate destruction to climate healing. And climate healing should be the focus of all our education as well. From ecological overshoot to ecological thrivability. From artificial scarcity, because you see, even the food that we have scarcity in food, and 9 million people are starving to death, but we're actually extracting 6 times as much food as we really need. So it's really an artificial scarcity that we create in food by feeding it to animals first. So from that going to a natural abundance, because there is plenty of food available for us. And from a death-dealing culture to a life-enriching culture. So these are all the questions that we came up with during our conference in Mesa on how do we accomplish a shift from where we are to where we need to go. How can we educate in schools globally to stop speciesism? So we formed a study group, Speciesism Education Study Group. So right now, actually, I have a software developer looking into an app that would allow people to add questions on the website and then rate questions so that and then the rating can be accumulated so that the most important questions start bubbling up automatically on the website. So it's called a progressive web app. And so I have a designer working on creating this and hope to have it ready by July before we meet in Portland for the next conference. So this would allow us to work on this interactively from around the world. So these were the questions, and this is how they were rated. So this was the most important question according to the people who had come to the conference in Mesa. Education is the #1 thing. And then how do we help farms transition their businesses, and what happens to all the millions of animals? And we haven't formed a study group for this yet. So how can we respectfully and effectively communicate with the environmentalists who don't acknowledge animal agriculture's role, especially those fixed and rotational grazing? So this is something that I'm going to have an experience doing next week, because I'm meeting a whole bunch of environmentalists who are finally coming to a food climate summit. And they do not want to hear the we word, but they are willing to look at the food climate connection. So we shall see how it goes. And basically, I think they are at a point where they are willing to admit that the current system does not work. And therefore, they have to look at, they have to put everything on the table. So how many large animals can the planet support? What percent should be human? What percent should be wild? So these are questions that we haven't addressed yet, but these are very important questions that are still out there. How do we change the conversation from CO2 fuels and energy to animal ag and its more important greenhouse gases? Now, this is very interesting because last week I was at a school strike for the climate in Los Angeles, and I had a conversation with a climate scientist who was telling me that animal ag is not that important. And he started attacking Goodland and Anhang's work, saying that they shouldn't have used the breathing contribution of animals in calculating the total impact of animal agriculture. So I asked him, if the animals were not there, what would have happened to the photosynthesis that created the food that the animals were eating? Would it not have been sequestered on the ground? And he said, yeah. So in that case, whatever the animals were breathing out is something that the animals took from the land and put it back in the air, but they shouldn't have, they couldn't have, they did not have. So therefore, the breathing contribution is a lower bound on how much carbon could have been sequestered if the animals were not there. And so he agreed that, yeah, that we need to count the photosynthesis and what it could sequester if the animals are not there. And that is an important part of the contribution of animal agriculture to greenhouse gas emissions. So I think we are getting closer to agreement on the importance of animal agriculture. The good news is that people like Extinction Rebellion are communicating the environmental urgency very well. So, but their solutions may not be, because they don't want to talk about veganism, their solutions are not what we would like to see. But we can sort of ride on their coattails and say, okay, the only way to do it right is going for a complete lifestyle change. So here is the Speciesism Education Study Group and their deliberations. Now we are trying to create like a platform where it's easy for us to do this online and people who are part of a study group can automatically start a Zoom meeting and start talking to each other about how they should address this and start having regular meetings online. Here are the new model questions, and you can see how we are rating them so that we know which is the most important ones to address. And the two most important ones that we addressed were, how do we rehabilitate areas poisoned by toxic factory farms? We formed the Land Rehabilitation Study Group for that. And how do we initiate the healing and balancing of the biomass crisis through veganic permaculture worldwide? From the Veganic Permaculture Study Group. So the rest were all so the questions about population and land acquisition. I mean, this is all based on the current model of ownership of land, which I think in the new model there cannot be any ownership because that's where it all started from. So here is the deliberation of the Land Rehabilitation Study Group. And the Veganic Permaculture Study Group. And so it comes down to, again, education. There should be more schools for organic permaculture, community center for learning, create examples, etc. Anyway, thank you very much. And we can have some discussions around this.
Hello, Dr. Rao.
Hi, Myers.
So thank you very much for this again. I will just quickly ask a question, but first of all, I want to give you an update because the last webinar I talked to you about a project I was working on, which includes launching it with a letter to the Queen, because I'm in Canada, and Queen Elizabeth is also the Queen of Canada. We're a constitutional monarchy. Now, the letter is very much underway. What I have to do is get it boiled down from a binder of thoughts, drafts. But what I wanted to say is it's going to be based on synchronicities instead of facts. What that means is, as I said previously, I recently studied Jung, and there's a concept of synchronicities. And for example, your presentation comes along as a synchronicity, so I have to weave it into this letter. My background is railway. I've been working for railroads for 30 years in various capacities. So my metaphor is a railroad. And it occurred to me that Vegan 2026 is a great destination, a vision for this railroad.
Wonderful.
And what I guess my question is, what I'm doing is really reflecting deeply on a change of thinking that we need and a change in governance. And somebody said that applied religion is politics. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. Applied religion is politics. So what you see in the United States, where you are, for example, is a very dramatic shift to the right, pushed by fundamentalist Christians. And if applied religions is politics, then applied politics is government. So we do have to take a look at the underlying governance. And so I'm wanting to attend to the indigenous wisdom at the same time we adjust our governance here and bring indigenous wisdom into governance in Canada. Now, indigenous people, they consider things very sacred, and they think of the seventh generation. They think of the concept of Earth as Mother Earth. They think of all our relations as a concept that they have. They're matrilineal, and indeed the word Indian, contrary to a lot of belief, comes from the Italian ungenta in Dio, people of God. They have corn, beans, and squash as sacred. And that's what they used to harvest and plant. And I was wondering, how, if 7.7 billion people start, say, planting corn, beans, and squash in this forest that you're talking about, the food forest, anybody done any study as to how much one individual participating in planting this forest could have? Are you studying that? Like, if the manpower of 7.7 billion of us start working together to plant this forest.
Right. The idea behind corn, beans, and squash is that they are like an ecosystem. They sort of support each other. Beans fix the nitrogen in the soil, and squash attracts insects because they have big flowers. So then they also pollinate the corn. So these three sisters grow well together and they support each other. So it's like a mini food forest we're talking about. The idea of the food forest is that there is more you can do along the same lines. So you can go beyond that. You can have fruit trees, you have dwarf fruit trees and herbs. So entirely, create an entire forest based on edible substances, edible foods for human beings. Now that will also be edible for other animals, so it helps animals as well. And so we have to be then, mindful of how we harvest it and make sure that we leave enough for the animals too. So the goal is to create an abundance of these foods so that we can share, not only with each other, but with the animal kingdom. There is the governance aspect, you're right. I mean, it's about changing our relationship with all life, with all, and with each other. It's about treating other life as also people who are at the same table. When we make decisions, it affects them. So you need to have representatives from them. It could be humans who are speaking on behalf of insects, humans who are speaking on behalf of animals, humans speaking on behalf of birds, and so on. So you have these councils who are going to represent the interests of those other peoples in any governing process. So there's a whole eco-governance aspect of it that Shelley talks about a lot.
Thank you.
Sure.
I have a question.
Oh. Go ahead.
So
Go
Dr.
ahead.
Ra, I'm Janet, and this is my first time here, and I live in Portland. I went to an event last night, and I heard about the 2026 conference coming here. I'm very excited.
Thank you.
And I went on the web and found this webinar. I have two questions. First one's a simple one. I'm astounded that the Arctic ice melt will happen by 2022. That's 3 years from now.
Right.
So I know the Arctic ice, forms and melts and forms and melts. So
right.
by 2022, there will not be any more forms. It will be just melted all the time.
No. What it means is there'll be no permanent ice in the Arctic ice. There'll be no permanent Arctic ice. So during summer, at the peak of summer, there'll be no ice whatsoever.
Okay, so they're forecasting that in 3 years. The summer, the passage will be free, and that's why these nations are fighting for rights to travel that passage. Okay, so that's permanent ice. Okay, and this for me, this climate change. What I read about climate change is full of despair, and when you show the system map, it makes the problem quantifiable, feasible, and it doesn't seem so overwhelming. And I'm just flabbergasted that we have a lot of smart people manning our government and environment, and they don't seem to see this food piece as being so critical to our going forward.
Right.
And I would like your thoughts on, is it, what's a blindfold on people's eyes? Because I think they know, but they don't want to recognize it.
Right. Yeah. Well, the blindfold is that their entire system is dependent on it, dependent on exploiting animals. So if you imagine a world in which we are not exploiting animals for any reason whatsoever, it's a vegan world, the vegan world will not have divisions among us as well. There'll be no divisions in terms of nations. There'll be no divisions there'll be no hierarchies like this. So their entire system of governance, their entire system of privileges will have to change. This is why they don't want to see it. Because for them, it is their entire way of life is being questioned. When I first started studying this 12 years ago, and I soon realized that I'm fighting the same battle that Gandhi was fighting 110 years ago. the same battle. It's just repackaged. It's the same battle against colonialism that has been going on for so long. So they pretended to give my nation independence, but they were doing remote control colonialism. And so colonialism has continued no matter, throughout the world, it's there. Okay, we have been colonized. And so this is exposing it and saying, now you have to really face up to the colonialism and you have to really, really solve it. And so they are stuck. They're saying, well, we don't want to solve it. And we have to force them. We have to actually start solving it ourselves, right? By coming together as people from the grassroots and creating facts on the ground and creating solutions on the ground that they cannot, that they have to just give up and acknowledge that this is the way it's going to be. So nature is on the other side, nature is beating them on the head. So some people are really, really scared about what's happening in the Arctic. Because once the methane starts bubbling up and it goes haywire, they don't know how to control it either. And their children will also die, not just our children. And we will also die. So they are getting more and more vulnerable to seeing this and to opening their eyes. But we have to just keep at it.
Thank you very much. I understand how threatening this is to them, and therefore they're persistent ignoring of this thing. Okay.
Right.
All right. Thank you.
Sure.
Hello, Dr. Rao.
Hi, Rebecca.
I have been just thrilled about the Extinction Rebellion because they've mobilized, they've organized so well, and I've looked at their video on how they organize. But then I was disappointed because veganism didn't come up. And so I have been to a few meetings and I keep bringing it up and people are hearing it and saying, yeah, I think I need to go vegan. So they're, at least in this area, they're thinking about it. And I go back and forth on how much to be involved in their group and doing a total vegan group, you know, like a vegan world thing, and how to get that going. But anyway, that's what I'm doing is I'm going in, listening to what they say and sharing.
That's a great idea, because the people who are on the fence are going to be going to the Extinction Rebellion meetings because they know that there is something really, really wrong.
Yes.
And so when you go there with a vegan message, they are ready to hear you.
Yes.
Even though Extinction Rebellion doesn't want to talk about it, because Extinction Rebellion is about trying to get that $100 trillion bypass surgery going for the planet, so they can make money off of it.
Yes, I heard on NPR last night a program that's called Intelligence Squared. It's a debate, and the topic was engineer solar radiation. Is that crazy? And it was all about technology solving the problems, and that kind of concerns me about where people might be headed to.
Right. Yeah, there is a lot of technocratic solutions that people are coming up with, putting mirrors up in space and things like that to reduce the radiation that's coming on the ground. And that's going to have all kinds of side effects that people are not aware of. So, I was suggesting to people, when you talk about geoshading, just talk about painting all our roofs white.
Right.
So, which is the easiest thing to do, and that would reflect the sunlight back instead of putting mirrors up in space.
Thank you.
Yes, Carol.
A couple of things. I like to bring in good news. I was watching something on news and found a video by the UK publication, The Guardian. And they had a 1 hour talk with two of the new children, well, I call the new children. One of them, of course, was Greta Thunberg, who has made such a splash around the world and has had great effect. and another was a UK youth. I'm not very good at names, but the two interviewers allowed them to speak, and they asked very thoughtful questions, and there were families in the audience. And the questions that were asked by the children in the audience, we're talking about upper elementary school age children, were profound, were far more intelligent than things I've heard from many adults, certainly those my age, the resistor ones. But 2 times the subject of veganism came up by these children. And Greta responded that both of her parents have become vegan. And because she has now such a voice around the world, this is very, very helpful. But it came up again. They in this, and I'll send it to you if I can remember to find that one. The second one I wanted to bring up was, again, I want to find out how mainstream this concept is going. And I found this in a grocery store next to the checkout counter, and it is from Time Magazine. And it's called The Animal Mind. This is actually a reprint and an updating of it. It's a $15 magazine, but it's wonderful in that it describes what goes on with all different levels of animals and what we think is intelligence and how we observe animals, revere them for their intelligence, and so on. And it goes into the question of meat production, goes into all the numbers of how many we slaughter and how intelligent some of those animals are, including the birds. And so it's wonderful that this is now going into grocery stores and people can pick this up on their own. And it's going to be shown through June, I think one of the later days in June. So it will still be there for people to come. And if you're going to be in Mesa tomorrow, I'll give this to you. I found it very encouraging because it's now playing on the consciousness of people who would pick up something like this in a grocery store. And by Time Magazine, you can't get any more mainstream than Time Magazine. There are things that I disagree with about that, but this publication is one that's very positive. There was one third thing that I want to ask you, and maybe I'll ask it to you tomorrow if you're there, about the vegan permaculture study group. I would like to join that. So I want to find out how to do that. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Carol. Thank you. Go ahead, Keith.
Yes, I have a couple comments and questions. The first that my concept is that where people are is they're trying to preserve economic growth. That the question in the back of everyone's mind is, how is this going to affect the economy? And so all the proposals, whether it's for solar panels or for anything else, is, well, you know, we've got to make sure to do it in some way so that we can provide alternative energy so that we don't mess up the economy somehow. And I think that I think that the more radical proposals on the environmentalist side, we need like a ready or not kind of a suggestion that says we need to do these whether we're ready or not, the economy is ready or not, and just we'll sort out the economy after after we approach it that way. And then when you do that, then suddenly these less expensive solutions, such as veganism, become more palatable, because it's going to be trillions of dollars and you're going to have to orbit stuff. I mean, how are you going to do this? How are you going to do all this fancy stuff and support the economy at the same time? I don't see how. I mean, you're not really going to be able to do it. So I think that the one thing that we could do with Extinction Rebellion or 350.org or whatever is to suggest a ready or not sort of approach to climate change. Even though we wouldn't specifically say veganism, you know, that could be like something that we're going to bring up next. Also, I have a couple of other questions about with the yields. You say that eventually we'll go to an agriculture that's entirely forests, and I'm wondering if, you know, yes, maybe.
No, yes. Could be, yes, we don't know.
Yeah, I'd be interested in knowing more about that and whether what the yields are and stuff like that. And also, I'm wondering if we need a scientific liaison study group or something like that. Like, who are these scientists anyway, and what are they doing, and why aren't they studying this? Right. I mean, I mean, not quite with that attitude, but you know, you get the general idea that that's what we want.
Right.
to happen. To have sort of like approach scientists like we would like any other strange cultural group
Right.
that we have to suddenly negotiate with. Anyway, those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Keith. Miles?
Who else?
Hi, Jackie. You want to have a question?
I was wondering if part of the resistance that Janet was referencing is animal products. The animal body is used in so many products, in so many things that we don't even think about, that if we removed animals from the system altogether, I mean, so many different industries and products that we don't even realize rely on animal products would also fall. So it's not just the food and the clothing. So it's not just fashion and what we eat, but it's in lotions, it's in oils. So I think that people don't realize how much the products we use in our home relies on every piece of the animal being used.
Right, right. You're right. I mean, this is why, in the block diagram I was showing, there is 260 million tons of food going into the food block from the animal block. And there's 140 million tons of stuff going into the other manufacturing and industries block. So, which is significant. And when I took that block out and said, throw it away, I had to replace the 140 million tons with plant-based equivalents. I don't know what that is because I do not know what they're using the animals for in a lot of cases. But we have always found a plant-based equivalent, in the vegan community, we always found a plant-based equivalent for everything that we have gotten so far. So there is a way to do it, but then how much do we need? I don't know. So I arbitrarily doubled the numbers and said 280 million tons of plants have to go in there to replace the 140 million tons of animal substances that are going into the other industries block. Now there again, a lot of our industries are doing things unnecessarily. A lot of our work is absolutely unnecessary. We deliberately make things because the corporations want to grow. So because we have a system based on growth, every corporation needs to sell more next year than what they sold this year. And because of that growth mentality, the corporation is persuading us to buy things we really don't need. So there is this push approach to the economy. So in essence, the planet is dying. We are on track to trigger this catastrophic climate change. And we are sitting here busy doing things that nobody really needs. Millions of us, hundreds of millions of us are working on, a hamster wheel or something like that to amuse a kid instead of working on, say, regenerating forests, which is much more important for the planet. So we are like, children in a, in a park, amusing ourselves when a tornado is approaching us. And we're not looking, right? Or I use the analogy of a quicksand. So we are doing all this weightlifting, and then we know we are on quicksand and we're sinking. So, so we really need to drop everything we're doing and start looking at different ways of organizing ourselves, different things to do as well. And saying, as Keith said, just start doing the things that are absolutely necessary right now. And then let's figure out how the economy works around that. Because ultimately the economy is just directing people to do things using money as the tool. It's just trying to harness the energy of all of humanity in whichever way, we go. So we should be harnessing the energy of humanity to regenerate the planet right now, more than anything else. Miles, you had your hand up?
Yes, thank you. With respect to colonization, that's very much of what I'm changing in my thinking and trying to express in my letter. and I would correct, I think I misstated. I would say the quote I should have said is politics is applied religion. So one of the things that connects you and me, even though I'm in Canada, is this document called the Doctrine of Discovery. It's a papal bull by Pope Alexander VI in the 1400s, and it's what Christopher Columbus used and other explorers subsequent to put their stake in the ground and say this land is ours if it's not inhabited by Christians.
Right.
So what I would encourage everybody listening to this is visit the website anglican.ca. That's the Anglican Church of Canada. They have a video called The Doctrine of Discovery, Stolen Land, Strong Hearts, because we have to raise above religious arrogance. And they talk about religious arrogance in this video. And we need to change our hearts and minds to change our lifestyle. Thank you.
Very much so.
Okay, I have a question if somebody else doesn't.
Sure, Rebecca.
Okay. And one of them is I didn't get or didn't see a copy of that report you were talking about, the Biotic pump, and I don't know if that's through email or could I get a copy?
I sent it via email, yes.
Okay, I'll look for it there. Thank you. And the other question is, when I'm doing talking about one of my favorite studies, the land use map from the IPCC, sometimes people have asked me, well, what about the land around here and near Austin? And I count that woodlands as forest until it becomes grazeland. But I wanted to know, they didn't have a woodland area in that map. And I tried to read, I read reports and they didn't explain exactly how they got all those numbers.
Yeah, so those forests, I think they have a definition of greater than 10% tree cover is a forest.
Greater than what?
10% tree cover.
Thank you so much.
So a lot of land gets classified as forest under that, when it really isn't much of a forest to speak of.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. That's a pretty small amount of forest then.
Right. Yeah. It's pathetic what we have done to the planet. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Just a quick interjection. Dr. Have you seen the presentation by the Australian Member of Parliament from the other day? He gives a scathing 20-minute rebuttal to a motion in the Australian Parliament about the horrors of livestock agriculture and the repression of whistleblowers, going against whistleblower repression. I can send it. I'll send it to you.
Please send it to me.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all very much. Let me stop the recording.